Hello and welcome to the Situation Report today. Very glad to have you joining me. This is the show where we do our best to give you the information and perspectives you need to navigate an ever-changing culture. My name is Jeremy Stolnecker, and today we are talking about a topic. We're discussing an issue that is a huge issue, but one that is often overlooked. If you've been listening to the show over the last couple of weeks, you've probably heard my recent interview with Jaco Boyens, who is a documentary filmmaker who does a lot of work around the topic of human trafficking and sex trafficking. In that interview, we talked a little bit about pornography. That's kind of the other side of the sex trafficking, human trafficking equation. We talked about what that looks like and how big that problem was. And it is a huge problem. As you'll hear in this interview, research has been done, studies have been done that have concluded that something like 60% of even Christian men are involved in pornography on a regular basis, 15% of Christian women. You'll hear that in the interview. This is a huge issue, not just in culture at large, but in the Christian community. And there's a real impact. Again, we talk about this in the interview today as well. This is so important. I wanted to bring on actually some great friends of mine who have written a tremendous set of books. Husband and wife, wrote companion books on this issue. We're going to talk to Jenny Solomon, who wrote a book entitled Reclaim Your Marriage. I've got it here for those that are listening and not watching. Reclaim Your Marriage, Grace for Wives Who Have Been Hurt by Pornography. And she wrote this book, incredible book, well documented, a lot of resources listed in here as well. And then Curtis's companion book, her husband Curtis, Redeem Your Marriage, Hope for Husbands Who Have Hurt Through Pornography. And these books both stand alone, but they are a great companion one to another. And I'd encourage you to take a look at those. We're going to talk about these books today and talk about the content, what the issue looks like, the impact the issue of pornography has in relationships, and what can be done about it. Very, very grateful to have Curtis and Jenny on. If you've listened to this show for a length of time, you've probably heard me interview Curtis in the past. Curtis is the executive director of the Biblical Counseling Coalition. He is also, has been a longtime friend of mine personally and of the organization that I'm a part of, the Mighty Oaks Foundation. He's a veteran. He, for a time, worked for the Veterans Administration, has a PhD now in biblical counseling, and is very involved in that world and has been a great help to us, helping veterans and their families. Just tremendous ministry that he has. His wife, Jenny, is an author, freelance writer, and speaker. They are the co-founders of Solomon Soul Care, where they write, where they counsel, where they speak, and very grateful to have them on. And again, they wrote these two books that we'll talk about today. Before we jump into this interview, I will throw this out there. We are talking about pornography, and this is a great interview. It's a very helpful interview. It's one that I believe can be a help to you and folks that you know. But a few sensitive issues are discussed, a few sensitive things are said, and so I would just let you know right up front, if you've got little kids listening, maybe you're in the car or you're listening as you're doing something around the house, maybe this is one of those episodes you want to listen to by yourself before you include the kids. Again, very helpful, very thankful for the interview, but just cautioning you up front. So we will now jump into our conversation with my guests, Curtis and Jenny Solomon. Guys, thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it. This has been it's been a long time coming, but we finally got it together. So thank you for doing it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thanks. We're glad to be here.
We are going to spend some time talking about your books, which I have, and I talked about those in the intro a little bit, and we'll talk about them again. But before we get to that and to the topic at hand, for those that aren't familiar with you guys, tell us your story a little bit. Kind of maybe how you met and family and the work that you're involved in now. Obviously, that's very important to the rest of our conversation, the work that you guys are involved in. So wherever you want to start in that, you can start at childhood. Don't start at birth because that gets weird, but childhood or when you met or wherever you want to start leading up to what we're talking about today.
Sure. Well, I'll start just by introducing I'm Curtis and Jenny Solomon. We met, we're actually getting ready to celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary.
Wow,
So I'll
awesome.
go backtrack a little bit there.
Awesome.
But right now we are serving in a variety of ministry capacities. I'm the assistant professor and program coordinator of biblical counseling at Boyce College in Louisville, Kentucky. And then I'm also the executive director of the Biblical Counseling Coalition. So kind of balancing those two roles is a challenge. And then we also have our own counseling ministry, consulting ministry, speaking ministry called Solomon Soul Care, where Jenny and I can be invited to speak places. I do counseling. I do some consulting on counseling and other things like that. And then today we're going to talk about our books, obviously. And so Jenny's been invited to be in a documentary about the topic of the books and speak on it in a variety of different ways. As I mentioned, we met 20 years ago at Southern Seminary. We both started at the seminary the same semester. And we got married 9 months later. We don't necessarily recommend that for everybody.
You always put that caveat. And this is not recommended, but this is what we did.
Yes, yeah. We used to recommend it, and then like 3 or 4 couples crashed and burned, and we realized maybe it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
Descriptive, not prescriptive, right?
Yes, that's right. We have 2 boys that are now 13 and 10, and we have a lot of fun with them, and just enjoy a variety of different things in life and stay very busy.
Yeah, that's very cool. And we've been friends for a long time. I say a long time. It seems like a long time. It has been, I think, close to 10 years with the work of the Mighty Oaks Foundation. And you guys have been very influential in helping me personally understand how to view a lot of the issues that we deal with. And you served in the military as well. So you guys have, so many aspects to your life that I think connect with people in a very real way. And I've said this to you, Curtis, several times, but of all the biblical counselors I know, you're like one of the most real biblical counselors I know. It seems like a lot of people in the biblical counseling world are a little bit detached from the people they're actually sitting across the table from and trying to counsel. You and I have talked about this a lot, but that's one of the things that I really appreciate about your books is it's very much a we know where you've been and we want to help you move forward. And I think, man, that's so critical to the work that you are doing and what makes it, I think, work.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and I appreciate the compliment. And all the praise goes to the Lord because anything good that I do or we do comes from Him. But that is very encouraging to hear, and it is both in counseling other issues as well as ones that I've personally struggled with. I think it is important to understand the person, know the person. And one of my biggest compliments I ever received was actually after writing a paper about PTSD while I was doing my research with Mighty Oaks and in my PhD program. And Jenny, I said, well, what do you think of the paper? And she said, I think you listened really well to your friends. Yeah. And that was a huge compliment because I do want to know and connect with the people that I'm ministering to, not just dispense knowledge or something like that. And as you mentioned, the part of the reason we wrote these books is because the struggle of pornography is something I wrestled with for a long time in life and brought it into our marriage and didn't do that thing that a lot of us think it'll do. Like, oh, if you get married, it'll solve that porn problem.
Sure.
And so I ended up hurting my wife through my struggle with pornography. And then by God's grace and after a lot of counsel and wisdom that we received, really led her to write her book, which snowballed into me writing this mine as well.
Yeah, can you guys talk about that for a minute, the structure of that? Why? Well, I guess, Jenny, what motivated you, first of all, and then how that became 2 books? I think I've never seen it done that way, which is very helpful.
Yeah, so early in our marriage, there just weren't many resources at all for even people who struggled with pornography. And as time went on, it was encouraging that there were more and more resources produced. And I wanted to mention a few that I found particularly helpful just because I know people in your audience are going to need these. Of course, I love Curtis's book. There's also a 31-day devotional called Pornography, Fighting for Purity by Deepak Reju. And it's accessible for anyone. I've known a lot of parents who have used it with their teenagers. Deepak Reju and Jonathan Holmes also wrote 2 books that are great for people. If there's someone in your church who's struggling, or if you're a wife and your spouse is struggling and you want to know how to be more helpful to them, those are called Rescue Skills, Essential Skills for Restoring the Sexually Broken, and Rescue Plan, Charting a Course to Rescue Prisoners of Pornography. But one thing I noticed as I was searching for good resources is that there just weren't any resources for spouses, really. And when a person struggles with sexual sin, their spouse becomes the collateral damage. And I just found myself thinking so many times over the years, what about me? I'm really hurting. Why isn't anyone writing resources that acknowledge and address the topics that are impacting me? And so just honestly, after a lot of years of frustration and then hoping and praying, God just gave me courage. And I thought, okay, Lord, I'm going to try to write this. And if you keep the doors open, I'll keep working hard until we get there. So God was merciful to allow this to happen.
Well, I know they've been helpful in our life. You guys sent us a copy when they first came out, and you sent it to me, but my wife intercepted it. And in fact, in order to go find these, I had to go find her to find out where she had put them. But she's recommended your book, Jenny, to several ladies, and used it as a resource even in her counseling. So it's been fantastic and a great help. You're right. I think most of the attention is given to the person struggling with the issue, and not to the families that are on the other side of that.
Yeah, and I think that was part of our experience in counseling too. As we'd go in, and there were a couple different times where the struggle popped up again in our marriage, and we went into counseling, and immediately the person would pivot to me and just work with me and try to focus on me. And I think it's understandable, right? If we deal with the problem, if we deal with the root, then the problem goes away. But the problem is that sin caused a lot of suffering for her, and there wasn't a lot of care and counsel to address and deal with that suffering. So she had actually, because of our relationships with a lot of biblical counselors, talked to a lot of biblical counselors and said, hey, could you write a book for spouses? Right. And they kept saying no. And so then that's where she really felt like the Lord was just saying, okay, Jenny, this is a project for you. Yeah. And when she approached the publisher, she had a conversation, and the publisher liked what she heard, thought there was good traction for it. But she said, do you think Curtis would be open to writing a book for talking about his side of things for the husband?
And I said, I don't think he would.
And I think originally I was like, no way. But the Lord really helped break down that barrier through the testimony of some other people, some good books, Andy Crouch's book, Strength and Weakness. And then David Pallison had a really powerful message called Leading Through Weakness. And he just said, listen, none of us are perfect. I'm really summarizing and probably butchering his beautiful words. But the only perfect one is Jesus. Yeah. And if we need to lead through our weakness, because we are weak, and his strength is manifest in our weakness. And as you talked about a minute ago, it really does help connect with people when you don't try to present yourself as perfect, but you're a co-sufferer, a co-laborer, a co-sinner walking through this world together.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more even about that, just the power of testimony and the difference between elevating your testimony and elevating God through your testimony. I mean, there is definitely a difference, and you guys walk that line very well. Let's talk about the issue. And this drives me crazy. I'm going to just ask questions that I have some real conviction on, but I'd love to get you guys to talk into this. Just very generally, very broadly, how big an issue is pornography? And I'll narrow our entire conversation down to the Christian community or the church community. I was talking to, I interviewed Jaco Boyens. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He's a Christian documentary filmmaker, and a lot of his time is spent dealing with sex trafficking, human trafficking. His sister was human trafficked in South Africa, where they came from, and so he did a documentary. Crazy story. I interviewed him last week, and I asked him at the end of the interview, if Christian people would deal with this seriously, what would happen to human trafficking? And he said it would end. Effectively, it would end. If Christian people would take it seriously. How big of an issue is this? You guys counsel, you spend a lot of time talking about this and thinking about it. How big is this issue?
Yeah, it's such an important question, and I think for people who maybe aren't aware, I would just say that at this point in history, it would really be hard to overstate the ubiquity of pornography.
Wow.
Covenant Eyes has done some really excellent done an excellent job compiling data on this topic. So here are a couple of stats from a study they did several years ago. And I want to mention that it was several years ago because during the pandemic, we saw trends of pornography use and alcohol abuse surging. So I think it's safe to say that these numbers have probably increased since the data was collected. But at the time the data was collected, 1 out of every 5 mobile searches was for pornography.
Wow.
And they found that 64% of Christian men and 15% of Christian women said they watch porn at least once a month.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You said 64% of Christian men.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And 15% of Christian women, which I don't think we often think about either, is how many women are involved in this. Just when you thought it couldn't get any better, Mike Lindell with MyPillow is launching the MyPillow 2.0. When Mike invented MyPillow, it had everything you could ever want in a pillow. Now, nearly 20 years later, he discovered a new technology that makes it even better. The MyPillow 2.0 has the patented adjustable fill of the original MyPillow, and now with a brand new fabric that is made with a temperature regulating thread. The MyPillow 2.0 is the softest, smoothest, and coolest pillow you'll ever own. For our exclusive listeners, the MyPillow 2.0 is buy one, get one free offer with promo code SITREP. MyPillow 2.0 temperature regulating technology is 100% made in the USA and comes with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. Just go to MyPillow.com and click on the radio listener square to buy the one, get one free offer. Enter promo code SITREP or call 800-870-0283 to get your MyPillow 2.0 now. Okay, so that is a big problem. But then the question in our society and culture is, well, what's the problem, right? It's become so normalized. You can't sit down and watch a movie without, some degree of pornography being involved in it, in my opinion. But people just have normalized it. It's okay. It's normal. This is what we do. What's the problem? Why is it something we should care about?
Yeah, I think given the statistics, it's actually fair to say that pornography use has become normal. If by normal we mean common.
Sure.
Because it's so prevalent. But we can't conflate normal with good. So pornography is harmful and it doesn't lead to human flourishing for anyone involved in the process. It's not good for the people who create it. It's not good for the people who consume it. So I want to give you a few more statistics that really, I think, hone in on the damage that pornography causes. So 88% of scenes in porn films contain acts of physical aggression, and 49% of scenes contain verbal aggression. That also came from a statistic I found on Covenant Eyes. In recent years, there's been an uptick in violent pornography to the point that 1/4 of women in the United States have reported feeling scared during sex due to the coercive advances of their sexual partners. Wow. And that's from an interview Katie Couric did, a podcast called Is Violent Pornography Changing Us?, which was very difficult to listen to, but I think it's just important in this, especially in this cultural moment. I think another thing that I found really jarring, Jeremy, is statistics that have to do with rape myths. So rape myths are pervasive beliefs that reduce one's overall empathy for rape victims or lead one to blame the victims for their assault. So a rape myth would include statements like, she said no, but she really meant yes, or did you see what she was wearing? She was asking for it. So Matt Fradd, the author of a book called The Porn Myth, points to 46 different studies spanning 3 decades that show that people who watch porn are on average 31% more likely to believe rape myths. So I'm going to quote another study here from Covenant Eyes and the Barna Group that's called The Porn Phenomenon. So they were surveying, in this particular instance, people under the age of 50. And they found that 40% of porn users under the age of 50 thought that sexual images are always wrong if they contain the following things. So I just want to highlight that. That means that 60% of the people that were surveyed did not think these things were always wrong. These are images that demean people, and these are really common in pornography. So like women wearing dog collars and leashes, being led by their masters, eating and drinking out of dog dishes, women that have obscene words tattooed or written on their bodies. And another thing I want to say to the person who doesn't think they see porn as problematic is I'd just like to ask you to call to mind some of the degradation you've witnessed when you're viewing pornography. And then I want you to think of someone you really love and feel protective toward, like your mom or an aunt or a sister or your daughter. And I just would ask you, would you want her to be treated the way people are treated in pornographic videos? And obviously we know the answer is of course you wouldn't. You would want her to be treated with dignity and respect. But the reality is that every single person deserves that kind of dignity and respect. And I think the Christian vision of sexuality is just radically different from the one that pornography champions, because we believe sex is a gift from God, and it's meant to be exclusive and tender and kind and passionate and always in a safe and caring environment.
Yeah.
And I had a section in my book called "Is Porn a Victimless Crime, or is it a victimless sin?" Because people think that. They think, well, it's just between me and God. I'm not hurting anybody. And as Jenny pointed out, all the people involved in the porn industry. But I also highlighted the fact that every relationship that you have, if you're struggling with porn, is in some way impacted by your pornography. And I even got some, not pushback from the publishers, like they disagreed, but they're like, tell us more, like prove this to us. And so I found some studies that highlighted the fact, just some of the effects that children encounter when one or more of their parents are in looking at pornography. And there's a whole list in the book. I'm just going to listen a few, but one, being exposed to commodification of human beings, especially women as sex objects, having an increased risk for parental job loss and financial gain, having a parent who's just distracted and not spending as much time with you. Those children are more likely to look at pornography. Obviously, your friends too. You may not think like, oh, my relationship with my friends is impacted, but if you're not being genuine and honest and transparent about who you are with your friends, you are lying to them. You're presenting a false self to them. And then obviously our books are written for husbands who've hurt their wives and wives who've been hurt, because your spouse is probably the person who's hurt the most by the porn use. So it's a huge problem. And Jenny even sent me a picture the other day that said now the average age for first time exposure to pornography now is 8 years old.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. It's incredible. It's getting more and more prevalent, more and more out there, and affecting more and more people, and younger people.
One of the things that's been very troubling to me in doing marriage counseling even, is how many Christian couples include viewing pornography together as a part of, their lives. And they'll dismiss it by saying, well, we're sitting there together, we're viewing this together, and maybe there's some reason they give. And that's just an indication to me that Christians are willing to dismiss even the hurt of, the issues that you just outlined. What do you say to Christian couples who would say, well, this is okay for us as long as we're together? That to me that has become much more prevalent than I would have believed it was, but the more couples I talk to, I think it's very common. And then Christians who, would say, well, again, it is victimless. This is okay. How do you deal with that in a Christian counseling type of, setting?
Yeah, the first thing I want to do is I want to figure out why. Why are they watching porn together? Is this a situation where they feel like they've lost the spice and they're trying to spice up their love life again? Is this because they are attracted to it, they're titillated by it, they're aroused by it? Are they unable to get aroused without porn? Like, there's just so many questions behind that, and it's always going to point to a problem, right? It's never going to point to something good.
Yeah.
So then addressing that problem. The other thing is just this: we have bought this societal understanding of sin that as long as something is consensual, that makes it okay.
Right.
And that is completely unbiblical. It's completely foreign to the Christian worldview. It is a secular perspective on life. And that we just have to help people understand that is not okay. And then drilling down into whenever we look at, sometimes it's hard to define all the things that are wrong with something, or all the variations, because there are so many variations in creativity we get with sin. So the most helpful thing to do is help people go back to, okay, what was God's original plan? What's his design? And when we come to sexuality, we understand that God's design for human sexuality is between one man and one woman within the confines of marriage. And any deviation from that in any way, shape, or form is wrong. It's sinful. And that includes bringing other people into it physically or mentally, right? And you do. Obviously, we go to Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus talks about if a man lusts after a woman, if he looks after a woman with lust in his heart, he's committed adultery with her already in his heart. And going back to that original question of why are you doing this, I have to press in with people and say, can you honestly say you're not lusting after what you're seeing on the screen?
Yeah.
Right. And like we said before, if they can't get aroused because of this, and this is actually something that's an increasing phenomenon, even with Christians. We're on a Christian college and seminary campus, and it's not foreign to this campus, but increasingly we're finding young couples that are almost sexless in their marriage because of pornography. So they would rather engage in viewing pornography and masturbating rather than actually having sex with their spouse. And help people understand, like, it is against God's design, it's against God's law, and it's going to lead to consequences that you may not foresee, but are there. And so wanting to help people understand that they need to honor God in all areas of their life. And when we do, it actually leads to more flourishing in our own experience as well. The most contented, and these are drawn from secular studies, but the most satisfied and most contented people sexually are husbands and wives in monogamous relationships. We just have better sex when we do it well and we do it according to God's plan.
Right. What do you say to, or how would you describe the impact to a spouse when they find out or discover or just know, it's interesting. I mean, you guys know this, but the work that we do with veterans, most of the folks who come to our programs are not Christian people. We present the gospel to them. We see many folks put their faith in Christ, and it's an amazing thing that happens, but that's not the starting point for a lot of the people that we're dealing with. And so the pornography question, honestly, for many people is not even a question. It's just, this is a part of our life. This is what we do. The husband may say, well, this is my thing. My wife knows about it. It doesn't impact her. It's separate. This has always been a part of our marriage. What impact does this have on a spouse? And again, it could be either way, I guess. But what impact does this have on a spouse?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Jeremy. I wanted to read you just a short excerpt from my book, and I think this encapsulates at least part of my answer to that question. The marriage covenant is meant to portray Jesus' passionate pursuit of his bride, the church, who he died to redeem. Porn makes a mockery of that covenant. Although porn use involves illicit sexual thoughts, there is more to it than mere imagination. These experiences are simultaneously real and phantom, brought to life by actors on a page or screen. These sexual images hold the power to wreak havoc. Over time, the deleterious effects of porn can slowly destroy a marriage. When the person who promised to love you exclusively is willfully looking at illicit images that objectify real people and pursuing them for the sole purpose of selfish sexual gratification, it is always a soul-wrecking experience. And I just want to highlight that fact that it is soul-wrecking, and I think whether we realize it or not, sometimes our souls are being damaged in ways that we're not even aware of. And so if there's a woman or a husband, I know this isn't a one-way street. There could be women that are looking at pornography and their husbands are listening today. And I would just want to say to that person that if you're hurting today because your spouse has a porn problem, your pain is legitimate. You don't need to grow thicker skin. You shouldn't get to the point where you're okay with the fact that your spouse is turning to other people. other than you for sexual experiences. One of the many reasons God sets strong boundaries around sex, and he places this gift within the context of covenant marriage, is to give us a little glimpse of Christ's love for the church. So if your spouse isn't honoring God in this area, they're distorting this beautiful picture, and it could even be harder for you to grasp Christ's love for you.
Yeah. When a spouse says to, let's say a wife is married to a man, she has a physical issue or something else, so intimacy is not a part of their marriage, and her solution to that is, well, you need to probably view pornography and take care of whatever you need to take care of. And, I've had that conversation several times as well. The damage is still being done, even if there is that consent, as you mentioned a minute ago. How do you address that with a couple where, the one spouse feels as though it's compassionate or maybe their duty to make sure that, the other spouse is able to have their sexual needs met, even if it's outside of their physical relationship? How do you address that with that couple?
I'm getting the nod that's for me. Yeah, that is a tricky one. But it's not uncommon. We go back again to the point of what is God's design for sex?
Yeah.
What is the point of it? And I in one sense want to commend the spouse who is maybe physically unable to have sex, that they are concerned about and thinking about their spouse and wanting to make sure that they are being pleased. But God's in control of all of those circumstances, and he can give somebody self-control, as well as the fact that vaginal penetration is not the only way for people to satisfy one another.
Sure.
Right? I mean, if we're going to be honest and real about it, there's lots of different ways that husbands and wives can please one another sexually, and it doesn't have to be direct genital intercourse. So I would encourage them to consider those options and consider those things, because the other thing is, this is not something foreign to human history, right? Abraham and Sarah, there was a in their mind a legitimate reason to bring somebody else into their sexual relationship, and it led to huge catastrophe that's caused problems for millennia now, because somebody violated God's plan for that. Johnny Erickson Tata, that many people know, she's been a quadriplegic for most of her life and was a quadriplegic before she got married, a woman with significant physical disabilities. I was at a thing where she was able to share about her and her own husband's, they even were very honest and free with us about sexuality. And it's like, listen, people with disabilities can have sex, and they can satisfy their partners well. And the point of selflessly giving yourself to serve the other person is the point. And if somebody is going to pornography, honestly, like the husband, if your spouse is saying that, you need to man up and be a man and say, no, that's not loving to you. Right. And I don't need that other person to be satisfied with you. And that is going to speak volumes of love and what sacrificial love and commitment and covenant really mean.
Yeah, that's good. One of my favorite phrases to use with people is, there's never an excuse. There is no excuse for bad behavior. You can never excuse bad behavior. And I think that this sometimes falls into that category as well. I've been given a free pass or an excuse to behave badly, when what you're saying is, if you love someone, it is really sacrificial. Figure out how you can care for one another emotionally, spiritually, physically, outside of that. Man, that's so helpful. Where does, and Jenny, maybe this is the conversation you've had with wives. What advice do you give to someone who has been hurt by this? How we'll talk about some ways that people can get help, but what's that first conversation look like when someone comes to you and says, my husband is doing this? How do you deal with that? In the secular world, the answer would be, well, you accept it or you leave. Obviously, we have a higher call than that. How do you help that person begin to dismantle the issue and understand what they should do next?
Yeah, my starting point is to let her know. First of all, I would just say thank you so much for sharing this with me. I think it takes a lot of courage. Anytime we're taking, especially a sin, sexual sin just has so much shame and difficulty and pain attached to it. So anytime someone is brave enough to come to me and say, this is what's going on, I am just grateful, and I admire their courage and I commend them for that. And the first thing I want that person to know is that they shouldn't try to deal with this issue on their own. They were wise to reach out and ask for help. And I just remind her, you're going to need support just as much as your husband does. And so if she's in a good church, I invite her to go to her church leadership and ask them to point her in a good direction. See if they offer wise counsel. If this is a church, if this is a healthy church that's honoring the Lord, that's following Scripture, they are either going to be able to offer some wise advice or quickly point her in the direction of a counselor who can help walk through this issue. And then in addition to that, I just encourage her right away that she's going to need to take some time to lament. And by lament, I mean just talking honestly to God about the brokenness of the world and the pain that we experience because of it. And the way I think of lament is it's not one prayer that we make to God, but it's this ongoing conversation. It's opening the door to say, anytime I'm experiencing this pain, or if a new aspect of this pain comes up, I can go to God with it right away. And there's a book that's really helped shape my thinking on lament that I would recommend. It's called Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy. But I would just say to her, this isn't something you're just going to pray about one time. You're going to continue to approach God with your sorrows and your burdens. Yeah. And to take time to really just hone in on, take time to do that. And I think I just want to say to your listeners right now, like if I could sit down, if you're listening to that right now and you think, I've never heard anything about lament, I'd like to start thinking about that. I just want you to know, if I could sit down with you right now, we could have a cup of coffee together. What I'd ask you is, what aspects of your spouse's porn use have been most painful for you? And some common answers to that are probably going to be broken trust, broken intimacy, distorted body image, trying to come to terms with the truth that your spouse isn't the person that you once believed they were, feeling like more of a babysitter than a teammate, just feeling deeply discouraged. And for someone who may be porn, this isn't the first time they found out about this. Maybe this is a recurring problem. They might just be to the point where they feel hopeless, like nothing's ever going to change. And so if any of those things resonated with you, or as I was talking, if something else comes to mind, I would say to you, those are the things you need to take to God today. Those are the ways that this is impacting your soul.
Man, that's so good. I was thinking as you were saying that, growing up in the church and in very conservative churches, honestly, I don't think that conversation, I've never been privy to that conversation that was one that was compassionate and helpful to a spouse who's been hurt. In fact, often the counsel, I think, is, well, let us help your husband, and you need to just hang in there, and you're married for life. This is the worst part of for better or for worse, or however we would talk about that. And there's so much grace and so much just care in what you said, which is, again, I think uncharacteristic. How can churches be more prepared to help spouses and families with these issues? If this issue is this prevalent, 60%, 15%, this is a huge issue that not only impacts the 60 and the 15, but the rest, the kids and everyone. How can churches be more prepared to have these conversations? Because I think the response of, well, we'll help your husband, or we'll help your wife, we'll help the person who's dealing with the sin. You hang in there. This is the worst part of for better for worse. That's a real easy answer to give, but it's not a helpful answer. How can churches be prepared to give the right answer, the helpful answer, the compassionate, really biblical answer to this?
That was one of my goals for writing this book, is I wanted to make a resource that I could hand to somebody who had never had a conversation about pornography before. So and they could read through this book with someone. And what it's going to do is it's just going to walk slowly, just step by step, through ways to care for this person who's suffering. And at the end of each chapter, there are additional resources to read. There are questions to ask. And so I just want you to know, if you're hearing this today and you're thinking, wow, our church hasn't done this, but I'd like to be part of making this happen. If 6 out of 10 men in the pews in my church are struggling with pornography, then 6 out of 10 wives are hurting in your church. And so I would say to you, you could pick up my book today, really just not know anything about this topic. And I think it's going to give you what you need to be able to walk through this suffering with a person in a way that's competent, in a way that's tender, in a way that points them to Christ.
That's good. And that's so helpful. Where do we begin to get help? And the two questions are, if I put in the question, the offending spouse, I didn't know a better word, but the person who is dealing with this, they say, look, I've got a problem. I know I've got a problem. I hate it too. I need help. Where do you start with that person? And then the second question is, what about the person who doesn't want help? I don't have a problem. This is normal. This is just how it is. Where do we begin? First with the person who does want help, and then with the one who doesn't.
I mean, I think honestly, there is a reason we wrote these books, and I think we tried to address both of those people, and that's where I did even include that portion in the beginning of this is a problem, because a lot of people, they don't recognize it a problem, don't see it as a problem. So I really tried to help them see, like, this is not just a nasty habit that I need to kick. This is a life-altering, because undealt with porn use is going to snowball into worse porn use, which is often going to then resort in acting out in physical ways. Yeah. And so it can alter and end marriages and families. Yeah. So I would start by encouraging them, like Jenny said, with the person who comes forward saying, man, thank you for pursuing purity. Thank you for stepping out and realizing you have to do something. Just like with post-traumatic stress or other things, acknowledging the problem and taking the first step is going to be one of the biggest things in it. And so I would say reach out to somebody. You don't need to advertise this to everybody, but you do need a few people in your life who know this is a problem, because you're going to need their help in walking through this moving forward. And yeah, grab my book. If you're married, get your spouse a counselor and get them Jenny's book and begin working through them together. Don't try to do this alone. You're not going to be able to succeed and move forward and flourish in your overcoming pornography alone. And for the person who's resistant, like say the wife comes for counseling, she says, my husband's struggling with pornography, and you go to him and he's like, hey, it's not a big deal. Yeah. She needs to just get over it, etc. My initial reaction is to grab him by the collar and slap him upside the head, right. But that's not official advice.
Right. Right.
It's to.
Was that descriptive, not prescriptive?
That's what that's in my heart, not what should come out of my mouth. But just to really, I think, owning up to and sharing my own personal, especially if you've struggled with this in the past, being able to say, listen, brother, I know you may not think this is a big deal, but let me share with you some of my story and some of the impact it's had on my spouse. And by the way, your wife is hurting. And just try to help them see the seriousness of it, the significance of it, and really the hope that there is to overcome it in Christ.
That's good.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I would do in this situation, especially talking now to the second part of your question about the offending spouse does not prefer help, and I would just say to the wife in the situation that she has the right to demand that her husband takes accountability measures, even if he'd prefer to continue to use technology without implementing wise restraints, even if he'd prefer to keep his porn habit to himself. She has the right to go to someone in her church, a wise Christian friend, someone who has spiritual authority over her husband if he's a member of the church too. And she has the right to say, these are the parameters that are going to be healthy in our marriage, because he's made covenant commitments to her to be faithful to her. And so if he on any level is breaking those, she has the right to say, to call in help and to call in support and say, I don't have to take this.
What about when that spouse is not a believer, maybe not in the church? One of the other major issues in Christianity right now is kind of the division of Christian people marrying unsaved people. And so you bring that into a church, and then you bring that into a family, and these issues arise. How do you deal with that?
I think it's a really great opportunity for the gospel. I mean, because at the core, at the heart of pornography, it's a sin issue, which all sin issues are worship issues. So an unbeliever is worshiping themselves and using these different idols, either pornography or substances or whatever, to give them feelings and pleasures and desires that they want. And what they are going to experience down the road, if they haven't already, is that none of those things will satisfy.
Right.
Because God has created us to worship Him, and anytime we are worshiping something other than Him, He's not going to let us be satisfied in that. And so it's an opportunity to go to them and say, man, let me tell you about something that's way better
Yeah.
than porn.
Yeah.
Let me point you to something that is, it may not have that initial rush, like dopamine rush that we're all after, but it has lasting, eternal joy and salvation for you and your soul. And it's far, far better. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to present the gospel and point them to Jesus Christ.
That's good.
Absolutely. And we really tried to carefully delineate in our book situations where a wife is being abused. You know, that's
Sure,
one of the
sure.
reasons I brought up violent pornography earlier. If that has come to play in your marriage and you're listening today, that's a different thing than we're talking about here. And I would just encourage that woman, if she feels unsafe or has been asked to do anything that is dangerous or painful or could inflict pain on her body by her spouse, to just reach out to a safe person and begin to share those stories and ask for help. And we just tried to be very careful to delineate those situations in the book too, to realize this is not we're not trying to give one size fits all advice.
Right. Yeah, that's very good. Man, there are a lot of other questions I could ask. Let me end with this one. You guys have a great family. Your kids are great. Played pool together not that long ago. It was awesome to hang out with your boys. I have kids, 2 young adult kids, 2 teenage kids. And the question I ask on the other side of this is understanding this is such a huge problem and it is so damaging. And sin is sin, but it is somewhat unique in that once it gets a hold of you, it's very hard to deal with. And I want to keep that away from my family. I want to keep that away from my kids. I want to protect my spouse's, my wife and I's relationship. What are some things that families can do to prevent this from becoming an issue in their family? Just some practical things that should just be a part of every family that cares about this issue.
Well, I want to start this. I'm so glad you brought this up. There's a lady that I follow on Instagram named Greta Eskridge, and she's been a great help to me as Curtis and I have started to think through how are we going to parent our children in this porn-saturated culture. And she recently shared a couple of stats that I think they were startling in a good way. I think some parents maybe have just kind of been lulled into complacency and need a wake-up call. And so these were 2 that really stood out to me. One, she said that 93% of boys and 63% of girls have seen explicit content before they turn 18. And this was the one that really, I think for some parents, they think, we're going to have to be careful about that when our kids are teenagers, but just listen and hear this. Children under age 10 now account for 22% of online porn consumption of children under 18.
Wow.
It's just shocking, how young. And I've seen this in my own work that I do. I have a public Instagram account because of the book. And the porn industry there's no other word for it other than predatory.
Yeah.
So a while back, I posted an article that my husband wrote for the Biblical Counseling Coalition. And the title of the article is "Accountability is Not a Sign of Weakness." And it's an excellent article. If you're struggling and you're wondering what accountability should look like, I highly recommended that. But since then, porn accounts started liking that post regularly.
Wow.
And the only way I could get them to stop is basically to make the like count private, which I'm fine to do. But my point is just that the porn industry is wicked and it pursues innocent people, like children under the age of 10, but it also targets people who know they need help and want out, and it continues to pursue them. So we've been on the cautious end of the spectrum, and so far I have no qualms about anything we've done, but our boys we have a young teenager and then we have an elementary school son, and at this point they don't have unsupervised access to the internet.
Yeah, that's one thing. The other thing I would say is talk about it. I think there's the complacency component, like Jenny was saying, where people get lulled into complacency. And then there's also the fear component or the awkward component where people it's like, well, I don't want to introduce them to it if they haven't heard about it already, or that's just an awkward conversation. The reality is they are going to be exposed to pornography at some point in life. You cannot prevent that. They are going to see explicit images. And even if they don't, they're going to see men or women, people of the opposite sex who they find sexually attractive, and they need to know how to deal with that. There are a couple of guys at the seminary who just did a great documentary called Into the Light, and it's helping people understand pornography and how to get out of it. And one of the filmmakers, when we were talking to them before they filmed it, was saying how his mom just talked to him about what is pornography, how to be on the lookout for it and then how to deal with it. And he said he still struggled to some extent, but it really helped him to come out of it, having had those conversations and being equipped. So we do encourage people to talk to their kids, and there's really great books to begin even early on called like Good Images, Bad Images, or it's Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. Yeah, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. So even at an early age, just helping kids understand like modesty and covering our bodies is something that God wants us to do. So if anybody is trying to show you pictures or ask you for pictures or show you their private parts or you ask you to see theirs, we don't want to do that. And then as you move forward, increasing the conversation and saying, hey, like there are lots of images out there of people that are not clothed, and we want to pursue modesty. We want to pursue purity for the sake of your own heart, having that conversation, and then putting in parameters like blocking software, accountability software on all internet-enabled device. Jenny said our boys don't have that stuff. I don't think any Christian man for sure, and a lot of women and anybody who's ever struggled with porn should ever have unfettered access to the internet. I mean, that would be like taking a drunk and just saying, hey, here's a gift card, an unlimited gift card to beverages and whatever, wine and more, or whatever your local bar is, and just saying, have at it. Yeah. Because it is everywhere.
Or a flask in your pocket.
Or a flask in your pocket. Right. Yeah, I mean, because that's what we have. We have these. Just lock it down. In that documentary, there's a really great segment where one of the pastors talks about the tight restraints he has on his cell phone. And this is something where leaders, you talked about what churches can do. Leaders need to talk about the problem. They need to talk about the fact that they struggle with the problem, and they need to talk about the fact of what they are doing to fight it. And the guy basically says, if somebody held a gun to my head and asked me to find porn on my phone, I wouldn't be able to do it. It's that locked down. And it's not an embarrassment that my wife I can't add apps to my phone because my wife has a password to add apps that's just an accountability measure we're going to put in place. And we shouldn't be embarrassed about those things. We should see them as benefits and helps and aids to fighting for our purity, for our hearts, and for the good of our families and for the church and for the glory of God.
Yeah, that's a conversation I've had with a lot of people who are struggling, or wives who are trying to figure out, how can I help my husband grow in accountability? And I think there's a maturity that comes where you go from seeing a boundary as prison to a boundary as freedom. And so we've been talking about that opportunity. So for us and our family, we don't see these accountability measures. I don't see them. I'm not babysitting my husband. He doesn't feel like I'm trying to control him. He is joyfully accepting these opportunities to have our home and his phone be a safe space for him, that he doesn't have to be constantly worried. Like if this temptation flares up, what's going to happen? He can just know, like, this is a safe space for me. And that is a joy for both of us.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting too. I was going to say funny, but interesting in the context of marriage, when we talk about, the one fleshness of marriage, and really it should be that type of relationship. And then we segment that out, right? We say like, well, we're together in this, but not in these other things. With my wife and I think our password is the same. Like her password and my password are exactly the same on everything. There is no division. And it wasn't even like that was a decision we made. It was more like, well, that's how married couples should behave. And so it's been crazy to me to learn of people who are like, no, I've got my thing over here, and they've got their thing over there, and then our kids can do whatever they want to, and I have to ask them their password to get on their stuff. It's mind-blowing when you think about how easy it is to access so much damaging content, that people wouldn't take this more seriously.
I mean, you work with veterans, and I know not all veterans are gun people, but a lot of them are. I'm a gun person. Yeah. I would never just leave loaded handguns and rifle, anything lying around with ammunition. Just say, "Hey, kids, here you go." But we're doing worse than that in some ways with technology, and just saying there are real dangers here that affect. I mean, you can see more and more studies coming out about the impacts on social media and all these other things on self-image, suicide, all this stuff. And we're just saying there are lots of really dangerous things that could physically kill you and will definitely do harm to your soul. Here, have at it for free. Yeah. And we're just going to let you navigate it by yourself, unfettered, no restraints, no guards. Like, take the safety off, load it, cock it, one in the chamber, ready to go. Here you go, kid. Yeah. But that's what we do when we have unrestricted access to the internet.
Yeah. Man, guys, thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you for writing the books. Where can people get a hold of these? Number one. And number two, some of the other resources that you mentioned, that documentary that you just mentioned and others, I know some of them are listed in the book, in the books, but so first of all, where can people get the books? And then what are some other resources or an area that you'd point people to?
Yeah, absolutely. So my book is Reclaim Your Marriage, Grace for Wives Who Have Been Hurt by Pornography, and it's available anywhere where books are sold. New Growth Press is the publisher, so if you'd like to get it through them, that's great. And then you can also follow me on Instagram. It's Jenny Solomon. I believe it's Jenny Solomon 2022 is my handle there.
Yeah, the books are available anywhere. I will point people to a couple places to find resources. These are for people who are struggling with any issue or people who help people struggle with any issue. The Biblical Counseling Coalition website has a resource page that has an alphabetized listing of problems and the links to thousands of free resources on those problems. We do have a paid resource called the Annual Guide to Biblical Counseling Resources. You have to pay, I think it's $7 for this, but it's a great listing categorized by problem of every published work in biblical counseling on every topic, period, that we can find. And that's $6. It's like a 300-page ebook, but it's all really well done. So you can just click in the table of contents, take you right to the resources you're looking for.
That's awesome. Curtis and Jenny, thank you for everything. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for writing the books, your friendship, the stand that you take, your willingness to talk about these things. You're helping a lot of folks, and really appreciate it. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you. We're so glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, thanks, brother. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome.
Many of our veterans feel they need to fight their battles alone. This self-isolation has led to the staggering statistic of more than 20 veterans taking their lives every day. The mission of Mighty Oaks is to eradicate the veteran suicide epidemic and help our warriors change their legacies. We've been able to help over 4,000 veterans and first responders by equipping them with the tools they need to live the lives they were created to live. Our faith-based, peer-to-peer approach has one of the highest success rates of any program available today, offering hope and understanding to those who need it most. By aligning their lives to biblical principles, these men and women are able to lead their families, their communities, and our nation. It's your generosity that can make a difference in the lives of the men and women who have fought for our country and our freedoms. Now that they're home, don't let them fight alone. Learn more at mightyoaksprograms.org.
Grateful for that conversation. I love the Solomons. They're fantastic. A lot of folks that I interview, I know because of interviews, and I know because of this world, but the Solomons, I spent time with their family, with their kids, wonderful family, great people. They have served God for a long time and really understand how to share their lived experience with those that they're helping and communicate what the Bible says and how to help and what God would desire. And so thankful for them, thankful for their ministry, and very, very grateful for the conversation that you were able to hear. Please take some time, share this conversation out with others. If we believe the issue is as big as it is, then we need to know that there are some folks in our lives who need to hear this conversation, and they need to get the help that's offered. A lot of great resources offered as well, so please go and check those out. If you're not yet subscribed to the podcast, do that now. You can subscribe right now or follow. The wording may be different. The result is the same. You get these podcasts as they are produced, and we want to make sure you have that, so please subscribe. Then take some time, go over to our YouTube channel, YouTube, of course, then look for The Situation Report. You'll find us there, and we'd love to connect with you there. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, leave us a comment, share the content out, and that would be awesome. Thank you so much for watching and or listening. Look forward to talking to you next time.